Spiritual Direction from Dante, Avoiding the Inferno, a book by Father Paul Pearson of the Oratory. Canto 1. Topics: Wandering from the Path, Self-Sabotage in the Spiritual Life, Rejecting our False Self-Reliance, and Learning to Hate Sin. Nothing can expose our vulnerability more vividly than the experience of being lost. Perhaps we've been hiking confidently through the wilderness, secure in our sense of direction, enjoying the splendid scenery, and basking in the beauty of creation. Life is good. A moment comes, however, when an expected landmark is not where we calculated it would be. Nothing seems to indicate the right path. Perhaps we dash around trying to find the path, but our growing sense of panic only makes matters feel more desperate. And since none of our friends or family knows where we are hiking, no one will know where to begin to look for us. We are on our own. The world that moments ago seemed so beautiful and comforting now seems threatening, as though conspiring against us and tracking us down like a predator out to get us. We are alone and afraid. How did we manage to get off the path? And how could we have been so careless? It is our own fault. We know that. But this realization only makes the feeling worse. But this wandering takes on an eternal importance when we have lost the path in our journey to God. In Dante's opening line, Our Life, he draws us into the narrative. Dante intends his account of his own personal struggle against sin to be more than an autobiography. It is intended as a sort of parable of the human condition. Although much of what Dante says is highly personal in nature, almost confessional, we are meant to take the journey with him, to learn the lessons that can apply to our own lives. St. Philip Neri would agree wholeheartedly. He had a maxim that his followers recorded after his death that says, "He who does not go down into hell while he is alive runs a great risk of going there after he is dead." So, welcome to the spiritual journey. Enter into it with eyes and ears open, and even more importantly, with open hearts. This is for you, and in a real sense, this is about you. We often bluster when we're lost, confused, or bewildered. We pretend to know where we are and where we're going, or pretend to be courageous, but we know in our heart of hearts that we are indulging in make-believe, kind of whistling in the graveyard. Dante's reaction to being lost, however, is very straightforward and honest. He is afraid, so afraid that he can hardly bear to remember it. We might avoid admitting it, but life often brings this sort of fear out in us, especially when we seem to have lost our way. We cover it up as a lack of self-confidence or bad self-concept, but the truth of the matter is that we too are afraid. And Dante wants us to face the fears we encounter in our lives without the need to retreat to play acting. That dark wilderness of our lives, we all have it, is frightening. Let's not pretend. This fear is really the theme of the first couple of cantos in the Inferno. We might know when we discover ourselves to be lost, but just exactly when we became lost is unclear. How we get lost is often difficult to pinpoint because it is the culmination of thousands of little choices, the product of lukewarmness more than a determined evil. There usually isn't a dramatic moment when we choose decisively to leave the path. We wander more than choose. A little off the path here, a little more there. And when did we stop saying those prayers that were once so regular a part of our life? And when did that bad habit really become a habit? It really is a death by 1,000 cuts. Perhaps that is why Dante's recognition that he is lost happens only midway upon the journey of our life, as he says. It takes a while to get ourselves thoroughly off the track. The modern world would refer to this as a sort of midlife crisis, a product of innumerable choices that land us in a place we had no intention of entering, and we are bewildered. How did we get here? How did it come to this? What happened? Dante describes himself, the time of his wandering, as so full of sleep. Perhaps he is referring to the way passion can lead our intellects into a sort of moral slumber, dulling our conscience so that we barely notice when we leave the path. We become so accustomed to the wrongs we do, and so weary of fighting, that we come to a place where we really stop noticing that what we are doing is in fact wrong. Conscience has been lulled by the lullaby of the world and our bodily desires until finally its eyes begin to close. We see in a dramatic way the stages we pass through once we recognize that we've lost the way. First, we are afraid and bewildered. Second, and this is where Dante is at the moment, we are convinced that we can cope. Dante experiences hope at the rising of the sun, which he sees as a glimmer of light over the hilltops. He thinks he sees the way out of the dark woods, out of the problems into which his life has descended. And how often men talk themselves into thinking that they can solve their problems on their own, and never ask for directions. Like Dante, we tell ourselves that we can calm down. It will all be fine. We know just what we need to do to get back on the right path. Misplaced confidence fills our hearts, like a reveler making New Year's resolutions while filled with champagne. We mean them when we say them, and saying them gives us a warm glow inside. How many of our bold resolutions come to almost nothing immediately? Think of the alcoholic swearing off the drink, or the adulterer who says he'll never be unfaithful to his wife again. They mean it when they say it, but what would you predict about their future? When we recognize that things are going badly and we are wandering off the path, why is it so difficult for us to get back on? Unfortunately, the answer to that question is not some external force or obstacle. It is something self-generated that rises from within us. In this spiritual life, we are often our own worst enemies. Our good resolutions and carefully designed plans often fail as a result of an act of self-sabotage. The beasts inside us keep us from doing what we so devoutly planned. St. Paul called it the old man, but whatever we call it, we know it lurks inside us, thwarting our good intentions. And Dante's confidence is short-lived. And just where the steeper rise began, just when he faces a challenge that will make a real demand on him, he stopped in his tracks. When Dante begins his ascent up the hill towards the light, a leopard blocks his way. His best intentions and desires are thwarted by the beast that is a symbol of vice and lust. Here we see one of Dante's important literary devices. He struggles with particular beasts here, and his trials in certain circles of hell and terraces of purgatory are a sort of personal revelation. He struggles with those beasts and in those places dedicated to the sins that infect them. Now, some circles he will breeze through because those sins did not weigh upon his conscience. As a result, Dante's journey is almost like a very personal examination of conscience, exposing to us the weaknesses in his soul that stand between him and true holiness. The first of these impediments we see is lust, embodied in the leopard that prevents him from making any progress up the hill. No matter how Dante tries to go around the leopard, he can't. The leopard stalks him. As Dante says, he checks me within the path I trod. And don't our weaknesses and temptations seem to attack us at the worst possible time? It is easy to feel like prey being stalked by the predator. Getting away from our habitual sins isn't as easy as it sounds. Those who do not suffer from the habit do not really understand. The habit can leave us feeling helpless, like a small animal held at bay by a crafty hunter. Dante's personal sins are blocking his spiritual progress. Any hope he had of escaping the leopard is dashed when a lion enters the scene as well. The lion is a symbol of pride and perhaps also of the anger that stems from pride. The lion is hot with wrath and is coming straight for him, and as an exile, Dante is filled with resentment and rage at what he perceives to be grave injustices inflicted by his political foes. We'll see many instances of Dante's struggles with these faults. The third beast to block Dante's progress is the she-wolf, emaciated and driven by hunger, both personal and on behalf of her offspring, to do whatever it takes to get her prey. She seems a symbol of greed or avarice, stuffed with all men's cravings, as Dante says. Again, as an exile, Dante would be particularly troubled by the loss of the material goods he left behind and by the desire to reestablish his former standard of living. Thinking that we can manage on our own, thinking that it is our duty to manage on our own, is an enormous stumbling block in the spiritual life. The path we are trying to follow is supernatural, beyond our abilities. It is foolish pride to insist that we can do it ourselves. Most spiritual writers recognize that transformation happens in us the moment we realize that we cannot trust our own powers, no matter how painful that experience might be. For some people, especially those who do not acknowledge God, self-distrust and can lead to a failing of despair. We've tried everything. We've done everything in our power, and it has not worked. They have nowhere to turn. But for a believer, learning to distrust ourselves can open us up to trusting the power of God. We will never learn to receive from Him the grace we need, so long as we are obsessed with strategizing and coping. But what an uncomfortable bit of self-knowledge it is to see that we cannot depend upon our own powers. This is a sort of knowledge that we must always require by the painful experience of trying and failing yet again. It is something we see only when we are face first in the dirt. We discover that we need help, and that is profoundly humbling. Now Dante's self-confidence has turned to despair. It is the she-wolf, finally, who so weighs Dante's spirit down that he gives up hope of reaching the hilltop. Like a gambler who, knowing when to cut his losses, leaves the table, Dante gives up hope and turns back into the dark valley from which he has struggled to escape. This turning back is not necessarily a bad thing. If Dante, recognizing that he cannot make progress on his own, gives up the spiritual journey, that is a disaster, a tragedy. If his self-knowledge leads him to ask for and depend upon God's strength, this apparent defeat is the first signal of victory. Before we truly trust God, we must have a sincere distrust of our own powers, a distrust founded upon our direct experience of failure. It is a painful lesson to learn, but that does not make it any less necessary. Dante sees someone and desperately cries out for help. He does not know who it is and does not really care. He wants someone, anyone. He yells, "Mercy upon me! Mercy! Whoever you are, a shade or man in truth." His cry is an admission of his own inability to climb the hill and escape the dark wilderness. The person he sees turns out to be Virgil, Dante's role model as a poet, come back from the dead. Virgil only gradually reveals himself to Dante, one clue at a time. Virgil knows perfectly well why Dante turns back and does not climb the hill. That's why Virgil's been sent. He asks Dante so that he'll be forced to put it into words, to admit out loud his helplessness. In much the same way that we must put our sins into words in the sacrament of confession. Even though God knows perfectly well what we've done before we tell him, saying the words, admitting it to ourselves and to someone else, really does matter. The fact that Dante's guide is Virgil is both a blessing and a curse. Obviously, Virgil is someone Dante can trust unreservedly. But at the same time, being on this path with Virgil requires that Dante reveals his feelings to the very man he respects most. Dante is forced to humble himself before his hero, the very person with whom he would most want to make a good impression. It is not surprising that his forehead was full of shame. Dante is honest with Virgil and indicates the beast that made him turn away from the ascent, and he humbly asks for help, saying, "Save me from her." There comes a time when we get so caught up in sinful habits that we don't have the ability to help ourselves, when the help has to come from the outside, like someone so sick that he can't get the medicine that will cure him. What motivates us to accept the help offered to us, and often to fight to get back the pathway to heaven? Often, pious thoughts about obeying God's commandments or contemplating the wonders of heaven are not enough. Not nearly enough. The battle is too difficult to be fought with such delicate weapons. We need a more deeply human, more visceral motivation, something that goes as deep as our attachment to sin. What we need to develop is a sort of gut reaction to the destructive power of sin. We need to feel revulsion for what it does to us. For this reaction to become operative in our soul, we need to see sin as it truly is in all its ugliness. Virgil now indicates that Dante can't merely walk up the hill. That just will not work. It is another journey you must take, he says, if you wish to escape this savage place. Sometimes good strategies and intentions aren't enough, and something more is needed. Being serious about fighting sin, especially habitual sin, requires developing a hatred of the sin and its destructive power. We need to strip away the alluring disguise sin wears and reveal the disorder, the ugliness, and the misery it causes. On his journey, Dante will need to see the destructive power of sin face to face. Dickens's Ebenezer Scrooge was sent on a similar journey. This up-close and personal encounter with the power of sin to corrupt our humanity is the ultimate reality show. Perhaps surprising for the modern sex-obsessed mind, the beast that Virgil indicates as the most vicious is not the lustful leopard, but the ravenous wolf. Lust can be very powerful, but avarice has greater lasting power. Rather than being satisfied with what it is able to seize for itself, avarice grows in its appetite. Quoting, "After feeding hungers all the more." Avarice also has a sort of respectability about it. We tend to admire those who have done well for themselves. The social respectability of greed is suggested by Virgil's comment that, he says, "many a living soul takes her to wife." Virgil tells Dante that it is best for Dante to follow him. And he says, "where you will hear the groans of hopeless men." What is it that the trip through hell will give Dante, and through him, to us? A very direct and personal knowledge of the destruction power of sin. This is the strongest motive in the battle against sin, seeing it, and quite reasonably, fearing what it can do to us. This fear of what sin is doing to us and to those whom we love can form the foundation of a productive sort of sorrow or contrition for our sins, a sorrow we call attrition. This fear is not just about what God will do for us. It is about what continuing on the pathway of sin will do. Dante is about to learn and share this lesson with his readers about just how destructive sin can be. Each soul we meet is an object lesson that should make us afraid of sin with a healthy sort of fear. Should Dante wish to visit heaven, another guide will have to lead him. Virgil, as we will see, often stands as the voice of reason, and reason can reveal the destructive power and the disorder of sin, and the steps necessary, well, at least some of them, to rid ourselves of that sin. But reason cannot explain the glories of heaven. They are supernatural and require faith. In addition, Virgil isn't welcome there. God, quoted, "because I was a rebel to his law, will not allow me entry into this realm." Virgil's own spiritual status and his awareness of it will be a point of ongoing interest.